Welcome back to the second part of my series on how law enforcement firearms trainings contribute to the shape of American policing culture. If you haven't watched my first one, I really encourage you to go back and watch that because I'm going to be building on some conclusions that I came to from the previous video. Let me reintroduce you to the former police officer who I consulted a bit and asked to help me with this video.
Hey there, my name is Phil. I run a little YouTube channel called That Dang Dad, and I was a police officer in a pretty busy area of Southern California for about 8 years. But now I'm a police and prison abolitionist because I believe that the current system is not working and it's not making any of us any safer.
I wouldn't be giving you the complete picture without talking about how the news reports that I got most of these videos from are created. Almost all of the videos I'm showing you here come from the time frame of 2013 to 2018, basically post-Ferguson and pre the current civil rights protests we have here in 2020. Nearly all of these videos is pre-appended by describing a situation in that local area of a police shooting that sparked civil unrest.
Reverend Jarrett Maupin led protests and marches after Phoenix police shot and killed an unarmed man.
In Chicago, in Minneapolis, unrest over the police shooting of a black suspect.
In light of recent police shootings, including the death of Dylan Noble 3 weeks ago, we've heard a lot of criticism of law enforcement.
In the wake of the public unrest, this is a tool that the local law enforcement uses to try to build support and empathy for their position in these shootings. To be clear, I don't think that it is inherently negative for these law enforcement organizations to try to lobby effectively for their position. Lobbying can be both a positive and a negative thing, but it often depends on who has more money to do the lobbying. The reality is that this video is lobbying because I've already come to my own conclusions and I am now trying to build a persuasive case to you. So with the understanding that the law enforcement organizations are trying with these videos and by encouraging reporters and activists to come do them to convince us of their side, I think it's important to look at the people that are going through these trainings. A complex reality of journalism is that if you want to have good scoops, if you want to get good information, especially quickly, you need good sources. If you cover the cop beat for a local news organization, you're going to need to get to know the local cops. And you're probably going to want to be in good standing with them. Law enforcement is not required to cooperate with news organizations in any way other than their official channels. I've done a number of records requests myself for information on local cases, both myself and others, and it takes time, and it's often like pulling teeth to try to get them to give you what you need. It makes a journalist's job much, much easier if they are in good with the local law enforcement. And if you want to be in good with the local law enforcement, you probably need to have the same perspective around these types of situations that they do. When I went through my situation, before I ever sued the sheriff's department, I sat down with the sheriff and her chief of staff. That was the conversation where I approached them and said, hey, I think your use of force policy should change in these specific ways. What do you think? What I got was the chief of staff telling me that it was my fault that I got a gun drawn on me, because if I wouldn't have sped, which was a mistake on my part according to her, then the officer wouldn't have made the mistake of pulling a gun on me. And so because I did mine first and he did his second, it was my fault ultimately. That chief of staff is named Liz Roca. Prior to being the chief of staff, Liz Roca was the investigative content manager for a local news organization. I'm sure that's how the sheriff and her got to know each other. This reality of modern journalism means that the people going through these trainings for these local news organizations, although they are framing it as weighing both options equally, in reality, probably at least partially lean towards the perspective of their local law enforcement. So the reporter is realistically probably there to provide the police perspective. But, that's okay because they're bringing in an activist who has an oppositional perspective in order to give that side. Let's talk a little bit more about that.
He is one of the most outspoken critics of police use of force here in the Valley.
You might recognize him as a high-profile organizer in the minority community. Just last month, he led marches on Phoenix Police headquarters after an officer shot an unarmed man.
We want his badge, we want his gun, we want his job.
Today,
about 10 days ago, Bethea walked the streets of Fresno and Clovis as part of a peaceful protest, in part against police brutality.
Attica Scott and Gary Bryce were among those leading the chants that day.
The other party is always framed as the opposition to the law enforcement perspective. To support that idea, these videos always include photos or videos of the activists protesting or saying things that are critical of law enforcement.
Hey, he rushed me.
Tell me why you shot.
Well, I've shot because he was within that zone. You know, I felt there was an imminent threat. I didn't necessarily see him armed, but he came clearly to do some harm to the officer, to my person.
To be completely clear, I didn't go through and do research on any of the activists that are part of these reports. I have, however, engaged a lot with my local activist groups and had discussions about the types of people that end up in these photo ops and news reports. The people that go to these protests or consider themselves activists are not a monolith. There's nearly an unlimited number of priorities and perspectives. Of all those different perspectives, I'm going to describe two broad archetypes that activists can fit into just to crystallize the point I'm trying to make. There are reformists, who at times of great civil unrest will find themselves oppositional to power structures such as law enforcement or local politicians. But for many valid reasons, such as wanting to influence more moderate or conservative political figures around them, don't advocate for radical change. Some of these people do end up running for local office eventually, and can help create positive incremental changes. But they never seriously threaten the powers that exist. Religious leaders are very often in this style, where they act as intermediaries between their community and law enforcement to try to help keep the peace. The other archetype I want to describe is the revolutionary. This type of activism is actively hostile to power structures, looking to attack the injustice that they see at the core of the issues. And in response, those power structures are often hostile right back, because the agenda of the revolutionary is an existential threat to those power structures and the people who benefit from them. I can tell you that after watching dozens and dozens of these videos, none of the activists they picture are of the revolutionary archetype. Now, maybe revolutionary activists are invited, and they just choose not to go. Maybe they think by taking part that they would be used as a tool or a prop for law enforcement. Or maybe they just know that there's no way they're going to change their mind about this. But the cynic in me thinks that they're probably purposely not invited. Mainstream news organizations often bend over backwards to try to create a both sides, equal weight narrative. More likely is that law enforcement doesn't want to broadcast the message of the revolutionary, lest they continue to normalize that idea. There's one final note about the reporters and activists that I want to make before we move on to the law enforcement trainers' talking points. Something that was obvious to me, as well as anybody else who owns guns, enjoys them, shoots them, is that none of these activists or reporters had any experience with firearms prior to this moment.
Possible burglar walking down the street. Moppin gets him on the ground. He's not complying.
I need you to keep your hands up, sir.
For what?
Because I need to check that waistband.
Well, why? What are you doing,
Because I don't know what you have under there.
Everybody, look at this guy. What are you doing?
No shots fired.
As she encounters a suspect attacking someone in the hallway of a school.
What do you want to do?
I want to shoot him.
Scott hesitates, finally getting off a couple shots.
That's a really important factor because it makes them a soft target for anything the law enforcement trainer is giving them. How could you possibly provide a complete worldview or potentially challenge anything that the trainer says if you don't know anything about guns prior to walking into here? Once again, I'm forced to ask the question, is that why the people in these trainings are there?
Why did you want me to take this test?
Because I want you to get the absolute feeling that a deputy gets when they go through the training, but to try to get just a little bit of a feeling on how quick things happen. What'd you learn in there? Wrong decision? You're dead. You don't go home to your little girl or your wife.
Listening to the trainers talk, it's very enlightening to understand the lens they're trying to get the trainees to see things through. To me, it seemed like many aspects of the training were purposely contrived to increase the feeling of randomness and uncertainty.
Turns out it was only a staple gun.
That's just a small example of a compressed time frame adverse lighting condition where you had to make that split-second decision.
I work here. Now look at the same simulation, only this time the man does have a gun.
For example, the only place I've seen a situation like this where there's 4 hallways and like a 120-degree angle would be a funhouse mirror room. So not really a realistic representation of any real building. In this example, where there's 2 people role-playing, the trainer suddenly joins out of nowhere to add an aspect of hostility and fear.
So you're at, again, a tactical disadvantage because he's laying in wait.
You didn't even look at me.
In this one, a routine traffic stop turns into a bystander recording the police, saying that they were abusing the other person's civil rights when they're simply having a conversation, and finally, someone popping out of nowhere saying, "Kill all cops."
Is there anybody we can call up and get your car?
Unit also be advised, we have a confirmed warrant for domestic violence on your driver. Sam Hyde, date of birth, 7/9/87, white male.
10-4. Is there anybody we can call?
It could be anyone, man. You sound like you're fishing.
No, we're not fishing.
Not me. I'm done here.
Unfortunately, you're going to jail today. So, I don't want to have to tow your car. I'd rather your car go to your house. Do you have a number I can call?
This is what I'm talking about.
Hey,
yes, sir.
Watch your back. Watch your back. Watch your back.
I'm riding right now, sir.
There's somebody behind us.
Yes, sir. No,
Hey,
I have
see your
public
hands.
property.
Hands
This
where I
is
can
public.
see
I have a right to record
Hey.
anything.
Hands
Yes,
where I can
sir.
see you. You're going to jail today. There's no
Yes,
ifs,
sir.
ands, or buts about it.
No, that's fine.
Step
That's
back over
fine.
there.
No, I can stand right here and I can record any activity between police and my civilians.
Sir, I
Yes, sir.
Let me see your hands.
I'll step back.
All right, keep them there.
Yes, sir. No,
Yes, sir.
I'm still live. Hey, bro, I'm still live.
Just stay
All
right.
right?
Keep your hands where I can see them.
This is not right. This is injustice.
Sir.
I'll be quiet. Fine.
You can keep filming, sir. That's fine. Just stay out of our business, please. Keep your hands where we can see
Fuck off! Shit!
In this situation, someone who was casing a car apparently left a weapon on the back bumper in order to be used in case a cop came and talked to him.
Scenario 1 is a call about a man casing cars in a parking lot. Maupin approaches the man and starts asking questions.
What? Where you have your hand in your gun?
You're looking for your vehicle. What kind of car do you drive?
Where you have your hand in your gun?
What kind of car do you drive?
It's my car, man.
Oh.
Maupin, the officer, is shot. It happens that fast.
Now, I know I'm not the only one that looks at these situations and gets confused, so Phil, do people ask questions about these in the actual trainings themselves?
You know, anytime that I did firearms training or FATS training, we never had anybody argue with instructors about de-escalation or anything like that. For one, I worked weekend graveyards, so I had to do training on my days off. All of us were just trying to get in, get it over with, and get out. Nobody really wanted to make a whole thing out of it. Plus, cops, especially old cops who are in training positions, hate to be argued with, hate to be asked questions, so that wouldn't really have been a productive conversation with anybody that I ever trained with.
On top of the confusion I kind of had just from trying to imagine these situations happening in real life, there were a few things the trainer said that I found troubling, to be completely honest.
Excuse me, sir. What are you doing here?
I don't speak English.
¿Qué haces aquí?
Yo no hablo inglés.
Did he break any laws while you were speaking
No,
to him?
not at all.
So you're at, again, a tactical
Right.
disadvantage because he's laying in wait.
You didn't even look at me.
It's an odd thing for me to hear, again, being a civilian, for a trainer to say that the fact that somebody isn't breaking the law is a cause for concern. I understand they're trying to say that it gives them less options to use force, but again, that is also assuming that the person they're discussing it with is an active violent threat waiting to happen. The conversation's almost entirely operated around the officer's life. And there was honestly very, very little discussion of conserving the life of the suspect. I'm going to move on from that, but don't worry, we're going to come back to that in the final video in this series. As much as there were things that they did say that I found concerning, I was surprised at the things that they didn't say. A common scenario was talking to somebody who says that they are on their own property, and what if that was true? Having a cop come up to me barking commands while I was standing in my front yard would be confusing and scary to me as well.
Who the hell are you? What are you doing here? You're on my property. Get off my property. I didn't call you. Don't stand there. Get off my property. I'll kill you. I'll bash your head in with this rock. Get off my property.
What about our Second Amendment right to have a firearm? Open and concealed carry are legal in most states under a lot of circumstances. We see demonstrations all the time where protesters are carrying rifles and firearms openly. These trainings seem to be incongruent with that reality.
The point when he pulls the weapon out, now what happens is he has presented a imminent threat of serious bodily injury or loss of life by putting a lethal weapon on that table.
So as soon as he put the gun on the table, I could have shot him?
Sure, because action beats reaction all the time.
There's often very little discussion about the suspect's personal safety, and if it does come up, it's always secondary to the police officer's safety.
bang, 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 bang.
Why did you make the decision not to shoot?
I thought I saw he didn't have a gun.
Okay.
I thought I saw he didn't have a gun.
Once you made the decision he's here, there's no gun, by the time you realize, it may be too late.
It's also important to understand that these reports and these trainings are going to be the absolute best foot forward for the law enforcement agency. I've never heard of a law enforcement agency requiring anything less than full control and approval of what the final outcome of these reports is. Because there are hundreds of thousands of police officers in our country, there's probably at least thousands of different trainers teaching slightly modified versions of this. I get concerned when I see so little discussion of suspect civil rights, because if they're not doing it in a training environment, it's definitely not happening in the real world. I find it very interesting seeing how the conversation changes when the trainer's discussing it with a police officer compared to when they're discussing it with a civilian.
Face my first scenario. Neighbors come to me about the man next door. He has a knife. He's drunk, and his temper is boiling over. Drop the knife and the beer. You got it wrong, pal. Put it down. In this scenario, he does drop the knife and the beer, but he keeps coming at me in a threatening way. Come on. Hey, calm down. Calm down. I didn't see a reason to shoot. And this is a gray area. I'm on the other guy's property, and he is no longer armed. If I pull the trigger, I might get charged with homicide. The reasonable thing to do might be to return to my property.
I mean, he never made any kind of overt move towards you. Right. But how many people would see the knife and just think, oh, knife, gun, gotta shoot?
Now,
it's interesting to see how much more emphasis there is on the legality of the shooting and ensuring that you're considering other options prior to going to lethal force.
You're on my property. Get off my property. I didn't call you. Don't stand there. Get off my property. I'll kill you. I'll bash your head in with this rock. Get off my property.
Why'd you wait so long?
Yeah, I felt like I waited too long. You did? I did. I waited too long. Yeah.
After watching hours of these videos, researching police use of force policies, and discussing the trainings with people who have various levels of law enforcement experience, there is a central philosophy that these trainings are trying to impart. Although it is never explicitly stated, the philosophy that these trainings are looking to give people is that a law enforcement officer's life should be prioritized over anything else.
One thing I heard over and over again from that training supervisor was, are you going to make it home to your family, or are they going to make it home to their family? That is something officers deal with.
Given that law enforcement agencies are funded by our tax dollars to create jobs that exist because we, the civilians, have decided that that is a function that we want to have in our society, I think it's reasonable that we get to have a say in how they perform that function. So we get to decide if that's a philosophy that we agree with and we want our law enforcement to have. And that's going to be the topic for the last video in the series.